This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
The three myths of the spiritual life. And we embarked on that a little bit yesterday with our introductions last night, when Mike Tricity just kind of briefly introduced the theme of the retreat, looking at these three myths, but also in that go-round that we had where we were just saying what we were working with, in our meditation, or what was our relationship to meditation at the moment. And obviously this retreat is a real chance to explore over the coming days, well, what is it we're doing? What is it we're actually doing in this spiritual life, this thing called practice, this thing called meditation? What are we doing, and how can we deepen ways of perhaps understanding that more for ourselves, but also understanding it so we can actually talk to each other. It's really, really helpful to talk about our meditation practice. And if we haven't got the language to do it, that can be really difficult. I know at the beginning I kind of really struggled in how to kind of talk about what was happening. So the three myths of the spiritual life. And I'm very much drawing on Subhuti's work. Some of you might be very familiar with Subhuti, kind of senior order member. He wrote a paper a number of years ago based on a talk that he gave to the order at a convention around the three myths of the spiritual life. And he wasn't making up those myths to kind of, pull into order the crazy order. He was actually kind of reflecting on the different ways of practice and the way in which they were emerging within people's own practice and within the order and within meditation in generally. And I think he was trying to offer a language, a way of speaking about our meditation practice and speaking across perhaps differences and different ways of practicing, so that we could kind of see how we were practicing in different ways and what we had in common as well. So I do draw quite heavily on what he has to say, because I think it's really important and very seminal, and also a little bit on Vasantra as well. And Bhadra, who some of you know from the Bristol Centre, who's written around who's given talks on the three myths of the spiritual life. Okay, so I'm going to start off maybe saying some things that are kind of fairly obvious, but I think it's always really important to start from those basics, because we can forget them. We can forget them, can't we? As we know, Buddhism began with the Buddha. So no Buddha, no Buddhism. Trundle along many years, no Triratna, no Tawaloka. No us coming together on this retreat to explore the myths of the spiritual life, to explore our meditation, our practice, what it is we're doing. And I find that kind of quite an inspiring thought just in itself. It's quite a thought, isn't it, when we just take it right back to the beginning. So basically, the Buddha, or the Buddha to be, gained enlightenment. He gained awakening through his own efforts and told others about it. And he told others about it, and they went off and they told others, and so on. And this lineage has grown up. So the premise of Buddhism, isn't it, is that we too can attain what the Buddha can attain, or what he attained. Yeah? It's the first verse of the second fold of the three-stage puja, which means a lot to me, a great deal to me. What the Buddha attained, we too can attain. So we can attain that through practice in all its many, many forms. And it's that belief that is encapsulated in the Buddha's parable of the rain of the Dharma, which some of you might be familiar with. The rain of the Dharma. Rain, as in water, outside. Yes, we may get to see the rain at some point today. So the rain of the Dharma, and that comes from the White Lotus Sutta. So I just want to kind of briefly, just, if you haven't heard it, or to remind you of it. So in this parable, the Dharma is likened to rain falling on plants. So just as the rain falls on the kind of myriad, diverse range of seeds, thus allowing them to kind of grow into the plants that they have the potential to be, so too does the Dharma rain down on the myriad beings, us, which in turn allows us to kind of grow into a true individual, an awakened being, the enlightened being, however you like to kind of encapsulate it, that we have the potential to be. Now, leaving to just one side for a moment, all the other factors, conditions that plants or beings need to grow fully into themselves, the soil, the sunshine, the sangha, the practice, and so forth, I find this kind of parable, or even this image of the rain of the Dharma, really inspiring, really nourishing in a way. Just as rain can be really nourishing for plants and the soil in which they're in, when they've become dry, they need the rain. It reminds me that I need that rain. I need the rain of the Dharma. We all need the rain of the Dharma. And it reminds me of the potential I have for awakening. And that puts me in touch with my deepest inspirations and aspirations for awakening. And it probably reminds me of how I felt when I first felt the first few drops of the Dharma rain. Yeah? And it felt like balm. It felt like a kind of, there it is. I needed that. And I think it's always really helpful to remind ourselves of that, because I think we can get a little bit settled into our spiritual life, a little bit complacent, and we kind of forget that excitement. I certainly experienced it as excitement. I hope you did as well. I hope you did. And that's why we practice, isn't it? That's why we practice this vision of becoming, awakening, enlightenment. And yeah, it might not have been what first brought us to the Dharma, what first brought us to want to learn to meditate, which is often the way for most people, not for everybody. But, it might have been very other things. A number of other things. We might have just wanted to be a little bit calmer. We might have kind of had this idea that meditation had something to do with well-being, or, wanted to be a little bit happier, or someone kind of might have said to you, I think you need to go and learn to meditate, And many people have told me that someone told them to go and do it. For me, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, I didn't want to spend Christmas on my own. I had no spiritual kind of aspiration at that time, just didn't want to spend Christmas on my own, and booked onto a 5-day meditation retreat, which changed my life. So it's useful to remember, to reflect on our response to first hearing the Dharma, to the first time we meditated. What drew us to the Dharma? What drew us to practice? And maybe, depending on your circumstances, to actually change the whole course of your life. The whole course of your life. And what keeps us practicing? What keeps us practicing? What inspires us right now? And maybe in short, it's to remind ourselves about what has brought us to this exact moment to be on this retreat right now. Could be doing lots of other things. Could be doing lots of other things with our precious time, but we're choosing to be here. We're really choosing to be here. So there's a reason for that. And yeah, I started to get a little bit of an inkling of that last night from each person as we went round and said something about meditation. So just kind of really allowing yourself to open to that. So Buddhism begins with the Buddha, but it also begins with me or you, in that we are trying to move, aren't we? We're trying to transform ourselves from the person we are now, with all our unskillful behaviour, with all our kind of delusion and our greed and aversion and wrong views and so forth. No judgment there, no judgment, just how we are. And to move ever closer towards becoming an enlightened being. So we're trying to move more from that conditioned to the unconditioned. So we're trying to close the gap, aren't we? We're trying to kind of close the gap between the person we are now. Well, I'm making an assumption here. I'm unenlightened. I shall speak for myself. An unenlightened being and the potential to become enlightened. And for that we need the Dharma. We need the rain of the Dharma to kind of pour down upon us. Now, how we conceive of that gap and how we choose to kind of move towards trying to close it is going to vary. It's going to vary. We're going to have different ways of doing that. And I'll come back to that more in a moment. But it's going to have consequences on our practice. So it might both open doors to us, particular ways of practice, but it might close other doors as well. So, wonderful example, I think this is from Subhuti. Wonderful example is if you see the Buddha, if you conceptualize as a Buddha, as this kind of really distant figure, he's kind of way over there, over many hills. I'm learning to climb hills at the moment, so hills are quite strong for me. So, yeah, if we see the Buddha as a distant figure, that could really inspire me to kind of practice and to keep practicing. This idea that I can just get a little bit nearer all the time. I'm going to keep practicing. I'm going to climb the next hill and the next hill and then the next hill. Conversely, depending on my temperament, depending on how the whole set of conditions, it might also just feel really disheartening. It just might feel disheartening, overwhelming, daunting. I can never do that. And I just give up. I just kind of give up. Alternatively, if I conceive of the gap between the me and the Buddha as being, well, really it's very small. I might even say it's a mere illusion. That could give me a great deal of confidence to kind of just break through to enlightenment. Yeah? It could also just result in a lot of ego inflation as well, and a lot of selfing, and a lot of sense of, well, I don't really need to practice because I'm right next door to Buddhahood. Don't know about you lot, but I am. I so don't. So how we think about that gap, or we may never have thought of it before, but it's kind of quite interesting to start to think, how do we think about that gap? Because it has consequences. It has consequences for us. It might have consequences almost at a kind of psychological level about how we approach our practice. But it will have kind of, almost for the want of a better term, methodological consequences, the how we go about doing it. And it will have social consequences as well. If I think I'm next door to Buddhahood, I'm probably not going to think I need a Sangha. Yeah, I can kind of dismiss. I can dismiss a Sangha and go off and kind of do it on my own. But, you know, if I kind of think that perhaps we're all kind of trying to get ever nearer to the Buddha, I'll probably realise that I need a Sangha. And it will have ethical consequences, and it's going to have consequences for the whole of our spiritual life. And in some ways, that's what we're trying to explore this week. We're going to be, on subsequent days, we'll be exploring that in more detail. So, just as plants are diverse, I need to look around here to see that, but plants all need different conditions, don't they? They need varying amounts of water and sunshine and food and environment to grow and flourish. I've had 2 plants, baby seedlings, in my room for about 6 months since I moved here. Annabeth gave them to me. And I feel really guilty because I just watered them both the same. And one has died. Because I overwatered it. I just overwatered it. I didn't give it, I didn't think about the conditions, that they were kind of really unique, because I'm a bit scared of plants. I'm not quite sure what to do with them, so it's just, water. Something about the consequences there. But likewise, we will all need different conditions. We come from different conditions, from different experiences, and we will need varying amounts of different things in order to kind of flourish and grow, because we're unique. We are each unique. So we have different conditions. They might be kind of historical conditions, childhood conditions, just our life stories. They're all going to be very, very different, aren't they? And we're all living in different conditions. Yeah? All very, very, very different. We have different temperaments. Yeah? Different temperaments, different personalities. We have different experiences. We have different beliefs, different views, and so on and so on. And we bring all of this into our Buddhist practice. And just in a similar way that Maitreya Siddhi was kind of encouraging us to just be with it all. Just be with it all earlier in the shrine room. That's what we need to keep doing, is just bring that all in and not like to push that shameful thought out there. Don't really like that. We need to just bring it all in. And that we bring that all into our ongoing process of going for refuge, And again, that's really helpful to just reflect on, what am I bringing? What am I bringing into my practice? So while going for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha Sangharakshita has written, is the defining act of being a Buddhist. It's what we all have in common. The how we do that, given the sheer diversity of us and our experiences, the uniqueness of each individual. I'm thinking of Amitabha or Pandaravasani's discriminating wisdom, the uniqueness of each of us. That's going to differ. It's going to differ. So it's only to be expected that different ways of practicing are going to develop. Yeah? It'd be a bit strange if they didn't. Yeah? So in short, how we understand and absorb and practice the Dharma will be unique to each of us. And that needs to be acknowledged and explored. And also recognising that we might have different ways over time within ourselves as well. It's not just between ourselves, but within ourselves as well. And that's to be expected. It's just to be expected if that happens. And I think this is what Subhuti was trying to get at in his paper. This is what he was trying to kind of reflect upon in an order that was growing larger, from the kind of small number of people that could fit in one room on a convention, to something that's kind of global, diverse, and so forth. He was trying to reflect upon that, but try to find a kind of common language, a way of speaking across all that. So this is why he had this kind of introduced this kind of notion of the myth, or the three myths. So before I talk about the kind of three myths, I want to talk about what is a myth. And again, Mike said he started to kind of just tease at that a little bit last night, but I want to kind of just elaborate on that, because I think it's really important, and we can kind of just think about, how am I responding to the very idea of a myth in the first place? Yeah, we might have quite strong responses to that very word, and that's fine, It was interesting, a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking about the word myth and myths of meditation. And I did a very quick Google search, and I put myths of meditation. And my God, I came up with lists of 10 myths of meditation, 20 lists of myths of meditation. And they were all about, don't expect meditation to be like this. Yeah, so if you think your mind is going to go blank when you sit down and meditate, that ain't going to happen, basically. And I thought, I think it's a little different. I think we're talking about myth in a slightly different way. Although I suspect if you unpicked all those lists, there's probably some bigger myths underneath them. They're trying to kind of get at something. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. Instead, we can kind of regard a myth as a story that is held in imagination. So from this perspective, a myth or myth of practice, a myth of the spiritual life of meditation is like a map or a guide which can help us to kind of draw out meaning and value and purpose. And as soon as I say that, I realise there's another talk inside of me that I want to give about the three myths of meditation and climbing mountains, because I have a habit of getting lost. That I'm just trying to put that to one side. It's the trouble when you start giving a talk, you see different ways in. Anyway. So, it's a map or a guide. So, viewed from this perspective, myths aren't, the kind of falsehoods that we might hold about meditation that we can find on a Google search, but are kind of really helpful, beneficial, overarching frameworks that enable us to understand, to articulate the meaning, the value, the purpose of what it is we're trying to do. So we're trying to kind of articulate that to ourselves, but also to others as well. And as I said at the beginning, if we do that, we can then discuss our meditation practice. We can discuss our Dharma life with kind of confidence and trust. So they can be trust building. And Subhuti, reflecting on this, he kind of states quite clearly that each of us need at least a kind of rough and ready kind of philosophy to guide our spiritual lives. We actually need that. So we need a kind of working notion of what we're doing, a kind of right view in a way that we can trust. That we can really trust to kind of lead us in more or less the right direction. And if we don't have that, if for whatever reason we don't have that, or we eschew it, we don't kind of think we need that, then we're just going to be stumbling around. We're just going to be stumbling around in the dark, really, not knowing what we're doing or where we're going. And he kind of says there's a bit of a danger of falling into kind of nihilism. We can fall into kind of spiritual stagnation. We're just not getting anywhere. And without a kind of myth, a view, a story, a kind of framework, we kind of lack any basis for practice and reflection. Yeah. How do we know we're heading in the right direction, otherwise just be going round and round in circles, but I don't want to talk about circles. So it's these big views, these stories that we can call myths. We can call myths. We could call them other things as well. You know, you might see them being referred to as models. Some people might prefer that language. As somebody who's an ex-academic, I kind of think I probably would have at one time preferred the term model. It's a bit more of a kind of, I don't know, nod to empirical science and so forth. But what we're also trying to appeal here is not just our kind of very rational, analytical mind, but our imagination. Yeah? And for some of us, that might be very, very easy. That might be very, very easy. I certainly know that it's something that I can struggle with, coming from the background that I do, that I can really struggle to open up to imagination fully. But I also recognise that I really need to. I really need to kind of provide every opportunity to kind of open up to my imagination. Otherwise, I end up with this very dry, rational kind of way of practicing. But, yeah, I can only go so far with. I can only go so far with it. So it's that bringing all of ourselves in. It's bringing all of ourselves in if we want to be truly transformed. We can't leave any bit of ourselves out. And yet, myth does have a kind of fictional connotation, a kind of aspect to it. And we don't have to dismiss that. We can open up to that. That's the kind of part of the opening up our imagination. We can kind of open up to that. And in some ways it can help us to be a reminder not to take everything too literally. Yeah, if you have a tendency to do that. Not to take our spiritual lives too literally even. So what I'm trying to say there is, yes, you know, if there is, when we explore these myths, some of you might already be familiar with them, but as we explore them in greater detail this week, or how you do already, there might be, a particular myth that you feel, yes, I feel really drawn to that. That's what I feel kind of committed to. Don't forget there's other myths out there. Yeah? There's other ways. There's other frameworks. And they might also be helpful. They might also be helpful. Because I think otherwise, if we don't do that, if we don't keep that broader perspective, we're kind of a bit in danger of closing down, aren't we? This is it. This is how we do it. And it all becomes just a little bit rigid and fixed. And I can feel my body tensing up as I kind of say that. And that can be really unhelpful as well. Yeah? And again, there'll be a chance to explore this through meditation reviews and so forth, and what we're going to be doing this week. So, all that is a bit of a preamble to let's look at the 3 myths of the spiritual life. So, I will, the real overview at the back, you may not be able to read that, you might not be able to read my writing, I can often not read my own writing, but don't worry, maybe we can pin them up we can not pin them, we can blue tack them up on the wall later on, you can have a look at them. So the first one is the myth of self-development. So, the story of the Buddha. The Buddha is encapsulated in this idea of self-development. And within this, maybe one of the kind of key statements is, I've become the Buddha. I become the Buddha. And linked to that is I can do it. I can do it. You can do it. Yeah? So this is this kind of very key statement. I can do it. And I can do it by my own efforts. I have to put effort in to do it. Yeah? And through my own effort, I can start to transform the whole of me. So I can start to transform my kind of unskillful behaviour, thoughts, actions, deeds, and so forth, into the skillful. Into the skillful. And through my own efforts, through doing this, through practicing, I can start to develop a confidence in my own ability to do that. Yeah? So it's a path of transformation, yeah? Where I'm developing confidence, guided by the Buddha, to completely transform my life, or for you to completely transform your life. And for that, we need virya. We need a large amount of virya. Energy in pursuit of the good. Energy in pursuit of the good. So that we can kind of, bring all of ourselves to our practice. And the kind of perspective that's taken within this is one of delusion. So we are deluded. Our everyday mind is deluded. The very kind of division that we made of self and other is it's a delusion. It's a delusion. And we need to kind of work on that. We need to work on that to transform that, to see through that delusion. So it's a path of regular steps. It's probably something that you might have come across that phrase, I'm sure, at your Buddhist centre or in Dharma talks or whatever. The kind of path of regular steps. Yeah? And this is probably going to be, when you come along and start to learn meditation, people might not say, you are learning the myth of self-development. They might not say it in that way. It might be helpful if people did sometimes, I think. But generally it's probably not articulated in that way. But it's kind of often underpinning. It's often underpinning what we're doing in our kind of foundational years. And it's really helpful. It's really, really helpful. It gives structure. It gives structure to our practice. It gives us a path. It gives us a kind of, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. And there are many practices that we could talk about that are related to that. So the kind of threefold way, the eightfold path, the path of, the noble eightfold path of vision and transformation, ethics, meditation, wisdom, the four right efforts, cultivating spiritual qualities, and so forth. Again, I'm just giving you an introduction to it at the moment because we're going to be exploring each myth on subsequent days. So what we could probably say about that is it's active. Yeah, it requires our active participation, and it's outward looking. The Buddha's out there. Okay? So with our own efforts, we can do it. I can do it. You can do it. There is a kind of very positive aspect, a very bright side to this myth, but there's also a kind of more of a downside to it, and again, we'll be exploring that. I don't want to kind of go into those details now. But that's the myth of self-development. Going to be taller. Thank you. See, I need Sangha. So next we have the myth of self-surrender. Self-surrender. So again, you might just want to come and think, no, what do I feel about just hearing the words self-surrender? What does that bring up for me? Or maybe I'm just projecting onto you. So in a way, this, we could say the Buddha becomes me. The Buddha becomes me. And whereas the other myth had the I can do it, this kind of is like, I can't do it. I can't do this. I can't do this on my own. I can't do it. Yeah? So what I need to do is I need to open up. I need to open up to the power of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. I need to kind of just, self-surrender. I need to surrender to the power of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. I need to kind of open myself up to receive their influence. Yeah? The reign of the Dharma, in a way. Just to kind of receive it all. Because it's them that will grant us wisdom and compassion. So there's something there around almost like the futility of our own efforts on our own. And we need to just get ourselves out of the way. We need to get ourselves out of the way. And in order to do that, we need Shraddha, confidence, trust, faith. And I know that Mike City is going to be talking about faith tomorrow. But we need Shraddha in order to be able to kind of self-surrender, to surrender. And again, it's similar kind of perspective of delusion, so in everyday mind, self, another, and so forth. And the particular practices that are associated with this kind of myth of self-surrender are puja, mantra chanting. Yeah, just think about how you might feel. I was thinking about it this morning when we were making offerings. We were making offerings, our fears to the shrine, to the Buddha. You know, that felt to me at that point a surrendering of something of, I can't deal with this on my own. It felt very strong for me this morning. So puja, mantra, what we get in touch with when we're chanting, maybe order level sadhana practice, if you've asked for ordination, kind of prostration practice, but also this going for refuge, that deepening, that kind of continually deepening and going for refuge, offering ourselves to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And a very strong element of this is service. Is service to the kind of context or the situation. Just offering ourselves to the situation that we're in. And I guess the kind of Tara's vow, the myth of Tara is very strong within that, isn't it? That kind of just stepping into the world and being of service wherever she is needed, just stepping in. So it's a very receptive kind of way of practicing. And again, is outside. The Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are outside. And again, that's a very brief introduction. Could you help me, Matt? We'll be exploring much more detail. And then we have the myth of self-discovery. The myth of self-discovery. So in some ways this is similar to the Buddha becomes me, but, there's a big but here, in this myth, the Buddha emerges from within, so it's inward, it's inside, yeah? So there's this idea, in a way, that our own nature is reality, or it's Buddhahood. So nothing needs doing. That's the kind of extreme version of it. The nothing needs doing. We don't need to make effort or need to change anything. We need to kind of realise this. We need to just realise this. Our own nature is Buddhahood. So it requires a kind of non-judgmental awareness that is present and receptive. So receptivity, wisdom, jnana, kind of key in this kind of myth. So through jnana we have a direct knowing of the true nature of reality. So unlike the other two that are taking this kind of perspective that there is delusion, it's almost taking the perspective of enlightenment. This is how a Buddha sees. Yeah? And there are particular practices. So probably most closely associated with this is kind of, and it appears in many different forms, so a just sitting kind of practice, which can be quite in contrast to kind of perhaps more structured practices, like metta bhavana, like mindfulness of breathing, but a just sitting practice. And I would say that within that, there are many different forms of just sitting. If any of you have done any just sitting, you'll know that it's a bit of a kind of catch-all phrase in some ways, and we'll be exploring that later in the week. But just trying to open up, trying to just be with what is. And yeah, direct pointing, which I'm not really going to say much about because I don't really know anything about it to be able to say. But it's trying to, again, point out the true nature of reality, trying to kind of get to that. Or just being with the heart, just being with opening up to our heart in this idea that it's all there really. So again, it's quite a receptive approach, but it's more inward looking rather than the self-surrender, which is receptive and outward looking. So those are the kind of three approaches, and really looking down at my notes I realised I was going to say that quote from Shantideva, but never mind. It might come at another time. But those are the kind of three kind of myths that Subhuti was talking about to the order in his paper, which have been explored in lots of different contexts within Triratna. And we're going to explore on this retreat. But I guess maybe I just want to kind of make a few observations around these three myths as a way of just kind of concluding. So I guess one of the most obvious, but often overlooked implications of this is there isn't just one way to be a Buddhist. There isn't just one way to practice. And I think we probably all know that at an intellectual level. We probably wouldn't dispute it. But I ask this question of myself as much as I ask it of you, is do we really kind of embody and live from that understanding? Yeah? Do we really know it? Because I kind of suspect that we don't, or we often forget it. Because if we really did live from that, we'd be less likely to fall into the trap of comparison. Yeah? I think there's some nods here, so I'm not the only person. But I think that we can really get into comparing our own practice to the practice of others. And we either find ourselves wanting, or we find the other person wanting. Well, they're not a real Buddhist because they're not doing it this way, or, oh God, they're all doing it like that, and I'm not. What's the matter with me? There's something the matter here. And then kind of getting to that, it's just futile, isn't it? It's just a really futile game of comparison. Again, and what we do then is we overlook what we have in common. We overlook the fact that we're all going for refuge. Mocha Siddhi pointed that out beautifully yesterday, that we've all of us at some point made that commitment by becoming a mitra. We're all kind of turning in a particular direction. And we can kind of forget that. We disconnect from others. And that can be really, really painful and obviously really, really unhelpful. So we might want to think about that. Do we fall into comparison? Yeah? What are the implications of that? We can also disconnect from ourselves as well very easily, from our own inspiration. So I don't know, if we start off in a particular way of practicing, it might work for a while, it all goes well, and we make some progress, we see some difference. In my case, my friends tell me I'm a lot nicer than I used to be. Whatever it is, we get an indication that something's changing. But somewhere along the way we become a bit rigid and a bit fixed in it, and gradually we kind of disengage. I think our minds just go, oh, I've had enough of this. You know, our minds don't like that kind of notion of being fixed and rigid, and I think it's very easy to get into it. Or we think perhaps something's the matter with us. You know, everyone else can do this, I can't. I'm a failure, and perhaps we stop meditating. We stop practicing, we kind of stop going to the Buddhist centre. You know, we can see the kind of trajectory. So we can kind of internalise it, or we can externalise it, can't we? We can look for an outside source to blame. It's the teachers. It's the teachers at our local centre. It's the Dharma. The Dharma's just wrong. The Buddha, he got it wrong. And we disengage, and off we go looking for something else that's going to kind of fulfill us, satisfy us, and so forth. And I think regardless of whether we internalise those kind of dips in our practice, remember I think it was Mocha Siddhi last night said that meditation was practice was a bit like a wave, yeah? So we can either internalise or we can externalise, create stories around the kind of, I don't know, our disappointment, our blame. And what we're failing to recognise that change is just an inevitable part of our practice. Yeah? And maybe that's how we need to approach practice, with a much more open mind. So we don't necessarily see the kind of troughs as, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, I can't do this. But, oh, this is interesting, what's happening? What's happening? How can I work with this in a more creative way? What do I need to do to adjust or make changes? Would it be helpful to talk to somebody or maybe do something different, and so forth? So how do we keep our practice fresh, our inspiration alive, and deepen our going for refuge? In effect, to kind of close the gap. And that's what we're going to, hopefully, be exploring this week. Yeah? Kind of looking at these three myths in greater detail, seeing what they mean to us. Yeah? Do they resonate with us? Maybe there's a particular myth. Sorry, I have got some questions up here. Write questions and I just rewrite them in my mind as I go along. But just in hearing these myths, as I said, you might have heard them before, you might be familiar with them, they might be quite new to you. But whether you've heard them or not before, you're hearing them right now in this context. So what is our response? We might want to think, what is our response to the very idea of myths of practice, of meditation, of the spiritual life? Do we find that appealing? Hopefully you do, because you wouldn't be here. But what is your response to it? And is there a particular myth that resonates with you? That you feel like, I feel really drawn to that. And equally so, is there a myth where you just think, I don't even want to go there with that? Or that there might be kind of quite a strong feeling of aversion or a sense of, I've been there, I've done that, and it doesn't work. I'm off to this now.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you